Welcome to Antidote Radio. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
Well, Jeremy, the Trump circus continues in full effect. It's going it's as steady as ever. It's moving as fast as ever. I guess that what all of us can say, no matter what we think, is that this is truly a presidency like none other. This week was the firing of FBI Director James Comey, which has been portrayed in media as being a completely unexpected event. Who knows really whether or not that's true. The story we're getting is that Trump had fired him, and because he had planned on it all along, and that there was even a very interesting. Trump is basically come out and publicly, in what a lot of ways sounds like a threat, saying you better hope that nothing is recorded, that our conversations weren't recorded, which you pointed out sounds like very much like a mob type threat, which is interesting considering some of the people that we're starting to that are starting to be closely linked and connected to Donald Trump, which we could get into a little later. But the story we've gotten is that it's all about Comey wasn't handling the FBI investigation into the alleged Russian connections well. And what I find really interesting about that is I think Comey did a service for Trump when he publicized the email case in the first place. And you can go back, you could talk about how James Comey was pursuing Mossad-connected spy businessman Mark Rich when Bill Clinton gave him a last-minute pardon at Ehud Barak's urging, personal appeal, and there had been some heat between Clintons and Comey. But regardless of where you want to go with who James Comey helped and what Trump reasons he may or may not have actually fired Comey, I get the impression, just like so many other things, that there are some important facts that are probably being omitted from the mainstream narrative, and whether it's John Dean, the former Nixon staffer, or whether it's Bill Moyer saying that Donald Trump is the biggest threat to our democracy we've faced in forever. I could see Bill Moyer's doing an editorial in his Texas drawl about how much of a threat he is, but regardless of all the noise that's coming out of the MSM and the pseudo-alternative media, I feel there's a lot of things that are probably being left out of this narrative. What are your impressions, Jeremy, of what's going on here and what some people might be missing with this whole Comey firing?
Yeah, so you're definitely correct. The Trump train continues, and maybe it is a circus train because a lot of these big elephants in the living room have now been put on the train and are passing by, and large portions of the U.S. so-called establishment media and political elite cannot even say, "Hey, there's a elephant. There's a Israeli elephant on that Trump train." And so it looks like aspects of this Comey firing are tied right back into that inability, unwillingness, the impotence in the face of that aspect of the U.S. establishment to basically lay out what's actually going on here. So we can see, I believe, this might be a part and parcel of a slow-moving night of the long knives in terms of the Trump crew. I think it's interesting that this comes on the back of them starting to turn against Assange, who was obviously a key player in helping create the informational context for Trump to be the winner in the election. And then Comey was the other key piece of that context to get Trump into the presidency in terms of the October surprise. And some in the Trump campaign were anticipating it, were signaling that something was going to happen. And it did. And Comey made publicly reference that they were looking back into the Hillary Clinton emails. And
Assange's time in the slammer, according to, or whatever Roger Stone said.
Yes. So that's in the background here. Is this a cleanup operation? Does Comey know where some of the bodies are buried? Or is this more honest in terms of what the Trump administration is saying, is that they just didn't like how he was handling things? Or is this related to what the former Attorney General Sally Yates was alluding to in terms of that Comey began to really push on the potentials of blackmail that was running in the background of the Trump administration, and she specifically was referring to Michael Flynn, and that she testified that she had given warning to the Trump administration about Flynn before she had been fired. And it's interesting, she had been fired, of course, on the back of pushing back against the Trump executive order about the ban from Muslim predominant countries, and specifically countries that were on the Zionist hit list. And so that was the frontal reason for why she was fired. But it also could be that since she was key to this warning of the Trump administration and putting it on the official internal record, really, that they were being warned about Flynn's compromise, that she also became a loose end that needed to be taken care of. But of course, the other side of this is that because the Israeli influence and the perpetual Israeli involvement and rising Zionist crime mob input into our elections, especially after Citizens United, and we'll touch on that more later. There is this – basically, it looks like that when they talk about Russian influence and Russian hacking, they're really mainly talking about these tie-ins to, and they won't even say it on the record, any of these congressional people or the media. But what it looks like it's actually they're talking about is this tie-in to the Russian Jewish oligarchs, which tie very materially and financially directly into Donald Trump's the rise of Donald Trump's New York investments and Florida investments in the last decade. And so that's one piece of this. I believe that during the Sally Yates testimony that there was maybe one congressperson who brought up, I believe it was actually the senators who brought up the Turkish connection to Michael Flynn, but almost no one else did. And Yates, I don't believe, did. And of course, there's a lot of attention paid on Flynn was paid $50,000 or something like that to go attend this Russia Today banquet with Putin and sat next to Putin, I believe. And a lot was made of that and trying to make him out to Flynn to be some type of Russian tool because of that. But in the background, in the much more substantial and material evidence of Flynn being an asset or an agent of a foreign power is the Turkish connection, and that his firm was being paid $500,000 to advocate on behalf of the Turkish government, very, very directly, I believe. And part and parcel of all of this then is these connections that tie together Turkish intelligence to Saudi intelligence and then also Israeli intelligence sitting in the background there. So that's part and parcel of all of what's going on here. And this really interesting article that was published on Veterans Today by Gordon Duff titled ISIS, the Mob, and Trump, More History Than We Knew. It really fills in a lot of some of the informational gaps about Flynn and makes assertions that Flynn actually was taken over or assigned a Mossad handler while he was in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, of course, is key to all of this because it is where the the black budget drug money was intentionally ramped up in the wake of September 11th, and apparently all high level on special forces types of people, which would of course include Flynn, but also would include others, are fully aware, made fully aware of what's going on with the drug running out of Afghanistan into Europe and into the rest of the West, and have been fully compromised and have maybe even being cut in on the deal. So this is playing in the background here. And of course, this tweet that you brought up of Trump expressing to Flynn that, he better hope that there's no recordings of our conversations. Something like that. He called them tapes. He put tapes in quotes. This is very, very gangster, and some people have pointed out, that Trump apparently does not worry about actually apparently warning or threatening witnesses on his Twitter account. So this tweet to James Comey from a few days ago after he fired Comey, basically saying James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press! ! And of course, Trump had also tweeted that someone should ask Sally Yates whether she knew who did the leaking to the press. So this is very, very interesting, and in this alludes to that this really is becoming more and more an openly gangster regime and government. And there was some follow up on this story about Trump's interactions early on with Comey, and Trump asking Comey whether he would pledge full loyalty to Trump. And Comey apparently resisted, pushed back, said he would not give him full loyalty. But after a little bit of back and forth, Comey was willing to give Trump honest loyalty. And so I don't know whether that means that that Comey was willing to not keep Trump in the dark about anything that he was looking at or pursuing, or whether it was that Comey would always give Trump his opinion even when he disagreed with him or something like that. But ultimately, Comey did pledge some type of loyalty, but it was not the full loyalty of a made man, and I guess he had to go.
Yeah, very good analysis, and it's hard to say where to begin with all of this, and where to really go and analyze what may or may not be going on with this. I think you made a lot of great points, and does very much sound like some sort of mafioso talking to his to a potential rival or potential person he does business with, making sure you have your loyalty or whatnot. Maybe we could address maybe take a minute to talk about this is a really interesting aspect. All this is the Turkish businessman who has been closely linked to Erdogan, who the Preet Bharara, who was the New York district prosecutor, was said to really be on the case of, as far as investigating his ties to something or another, and that now he was fired as a prosecutor, and the talk has been to replace him with former Attorney General Michael Mukasey's son. Maybe what is the significance of that in your view?
Right, because this is another part of the Night of the Long Knives, in a way, was the dismissal of Preet Bharara of the Southern District, the Attorney General of the Southern District of New York, which of course is the key. Probably, if there's a single district outside of D.C. in the United States in terms of a legal district, that would be it. Includes Manhattan. And so that area, of course, becomes even more important when you have the first New York mob president in the White House in terms of Trump. So that Trump had, I believed, had made it seem he was going to keep Bharara on, and then pulled the plug on him in an unexpected fashion. And of course, Trump's boosters say that Trump's ability to fire people is, of course, indicative of his managerial prowess. And it's hard to fight back against that. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. He's obviously he handles his business and gets rid of people that he needs to get rid of. So this Preet Bharara firing, as apparently it was on the rise, looking into some of these gangster networks that surrounded Trump and his business dealings. There's this case that's, I think it's like going to, I don't know if it's going to be in the courts this coming week, but it ties a Turkish billionaire very close to Erdogan to an Iranian billionaire that looks like he's close to the so-called reformists and the Rafsanjani crowd in Iran, that apparently have ties into some of the Rothschild's networks and some of the Jewish power networks. So there's a lot of moving pieces to this.
That may actually explain some of the infighting with the Ayatollahs wanting to keep certain candidates from having any sort of platform in Iran. So that's another thing to look at over time, potentially. Yes.
And and this is playing out in court cases. Some of them it plays out in the court cases being dismissed or being hidden. That's definitely what came of some of the Felix Sater cases. Sater is a key figure here. He helped set up Bayrock, which is an investment group that was key to investing in Trump's Soho in Manhattan, and this is a larger arc of Trump's history, that as the Soviet Union went under and there was this intense rise of the oligarchs, many of them Jewish oligarchs directly tied into the Israeli right, specifically through the population transfers of sort of hard right Soviet Union Jews who went to Israel, and a lot of the very hardline settler movement in Israel is made up of some of this old school Soviet Union Jewish Russian population. And so that's playing in the background here. And so it's interesting to watch the media dance around this, even like someone like Rachel Maddow, who's interested in Trump's tax returns. And of course, there probably is a lot of interesting things in Trump's tax returns, and that's probably why they haven't been released. There are probably tons of journalistic lines that could be pursued that could show the mob connections, the mob backing of Trump. But nowhere along the line does Rachel Maddow or any of these Congress people ever point out that these Russian oligarchs who have been backing Trump, who Trump has this relationship with, are almost all Jewish. And Sater was honored by a Lubavitch group, I believe, in New York City. And then there's another, I believe, a Kazakh billionaire who's also Jewish, who's considered a leader in the New York Jewish community. And but that's not being talked about at all. So that's in the background here. So people should go look at some of these cases that are coming up in New York City, and look at the background of Felix Sater, whose father was a very openly acknowledged mob guy, and tied back into some of the most powerful and most dangerous Jewish Russian mobsters. So this is a pretty dangerous crew when it comes down to it. And so then you begin to look at like someone like Adelson, Sheldon Adelson, who this Las Vegas connection to some of the Jewish oligarchs in the United States of America are a tie-in to the Netanyahu faction in Israel, and apparently this dispute between Ronald Lauder, seen as the legacy of Shimon Peres in New York City, and not a nice a moderate liberal Zionist billionaire who's arguing for making peace potentially with the Palestinians right now, and there's a squabble between him and Adelson. And Adelson represents the direct tie-in to the hardline Likud and the Home Party, the Naftali Bennett types who are not interested in any type of peace. They're interested in Lebensraum and eternally increasing Lebensraum for the Greater Israel Project.
Yes, you raise a lot of great points, and we'll link to the Veterans Today article, and people can take a look at it and draw their own conclusions from it. Because we both feel this is a very important article, and whatever feelings, preconceived notions you might have about Veterans Today or whatever it may or may not represent, I would strongly recommend just looking at the article with an open mind, because it really does. I think, raise a lot of, at the very least, should raise some questions. And if you still have some hope out for Donald Trump, which I think is somewhat understandable in a way, although I think it's increasingly difficult to continue to, in many ways, justify a lot of what Trump and the people around him are doing. But if you still have that hope in him, I think that at the very least it'll cause anyone to have some serious questions, and any open-minded, intellectually honest person would have to, at least I think, concede that there might be something to all of this information that's in this article. And it's and as you said, you raised a lot of different points, and it really brings up just how this is another failure of the alternative media. That Michael Flynn, on one side, they're focusing on his oh man, he took a payment from a Russian television network, and the other side is hailing him as some sort of great patriot because he was the guy who was taken out by the liberals as soon as Trump got in, when this is the guy who was frothing at the mouth for a military conflict with Iran. And we've speculated that perhaps there are some elements within the intelligence and within the DC community that do not want a military conflict with Iran that perhaps got Flynn out of there. And if that's the case, then regardless of their intentions or their motivations in doing it, they did a service as far as I'm concerned. But and going beyond that, it looks like Flynn is a very important key player in a lot of what has been going on during the last 48 years. And it increasingly looks like the so-called patriots who were purged during the Obama administration were people like Michael Flynn and those closely connected to him.
Yes, there's a lot of points there. Actually, in this Veterans Today article, it does go back over 10 years pretty much in terms of a key moment in around 2006, 2007, when there was an escalation of a plan to instigate an attack on Iran. This was stood down by elements of patriotic elements within the U.S. military. Some of this was being run through the U.S. Navy through Bahrain, and people like Gwyneth Todd pushed back against it and exposed it. And you remember at the time that there was also the Minot base missing nukes that apparently was tied back into Cheney. So there's a lot here. This goes back, into the Bush administration there, but it also then continues into the Obama administration. And this article talks about the compromise of Obama and how Obama, although he was not interested apparently in aggression towards Iran, which is obviously shown, well, at least not military aggression towards Iran in that overt fashion, which is borne out by the Iran deal. But in the background, of course, of this Iran deal is this financial warfare that apparently was being organized through the intelligence asset Felix Sater. And what I didn't mention before in terms of Felix Sater is that part of the way that both the transcripts and the discovery record from his case regarding, I believe, is racketeering of some sort, the way that it was ultimately suppressed and hidden, and the reason that his charges were not pursued ultimately to the greater extent was because he apparently made a deal, not only in terms of giving information about maybe some lower level guys or other people in the racketeering mix, but mainly it looks like because he was willing to become an intelligence agent of some sort. Probably through the CIA, and he was involved in. They say that he was involved in information or deals potentially having to do with Stinger missiles and Afghanistan, but also he was some type of conduit around these deals to try to do financial warfare against elements of the Islamic Iranian Republic. So there's that, and but there's also this sense. This is where the U.S. media is obviously compromised too, in that how much they talk about whether it's the fake news or the leaks, all coming somehow through Russian intelligence. Whether or not that any of that's true, it doesn't really, I mean, what we know of from the inside of the DNC leaks is it looks like it was an actual leak from an insider. The Podesta emails were a hack of some sort. It was a very lightweight hack, and whether that hack had relationships to Russian intelligence is not yet convincing. But what's so interesting about this is that what's on the surface is that in terms of this idea of fake news that the liberal establishment likes to rail on and connects it to Russia, we have people like the Mercers and Cambridge Analytica as front and center in terms of dialing in weaponized fake news towards very specific populations on the right to support the Trump administration. And it was very, very sophisticated psychological warfare that was then distributed and signal boosted and signal shaped by specific organs of the alternative right media, such as Breitbart News, straight out of Jerusalem, straight out of a Breitbart working relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. Don't have to worry about that,
because Steve Bannon's a Catholic, and it's all Jewish guy Jared Kushner's fault for everything bad Trump does.
He's a good white Catholic Zionist.
Who
Bannon
only wants to start a new crusade in the Middle East.
Yes, exactly. He's the Clash of Civilizations goy that we can trust, right? Yes. Okay. And then not only that, but then also InfoWars. And InfoWars ran the piece that was basically Trump is a closet truther. Trump is a diehard. He's basically he's a sleeper Bircher agent of some sort, and he was reading the same stuff that Alex was. None dare call it conspiracy, and Trump knows the whole truth. And once he gets in there, he's going to tell us.
Jeremy, considering some of the alternative facts, there's that term again that you've kind of raised, and people like Nick Spiro have raised about the John Birch Society. Perhaps he was reading that stuff.
Yes, right, and that's a good point. So that's another piece of this, is that this again is the Israeli or Zionist elephant in the room that can't be talked about, and so it's talked about and it's shunted off as some type of Russian angle. And you look at the release of the document that was supposedly the evidence for the Russian hacking, straight out of the open what is the Open Enterprise group or something like that from the intelligence community, and there was very little of substance there, and then a large portion of it went back to RT programs from 2012 even, and talking about breaking the set, and Abby Martin sowing discontent by covering the Occupy movement and fracking, and then the truth, what's it called, the truth excavator. What's that other program? The Daniel
Seeker,
Bushnell program
Seeker.
that they mentioned.
The Truth Seeker. He's the one who really went more in depth about September 11th than probably anybody in RT, or for that matter in most media anywhere you can find in the West. That was Daniel Bushnell. Yeah, the Truth Seeker.
Yeah, and it was interesting that even in that document they did not mention 9/11 Truth, because. And Kevin Barrett was involved with Truth Seeker in probably one of the best programs exposing 9/11 that was ever going to go out over the RT network. And then supposedly there was heavy, some type of Google censorship that even went into the emails, where people who got the email with the link weren't able to access it. And then ultimately, I believe it was put on a back burner after it was aired. And so it's interesting that wasn't even touched upon. I mean, what could be more unsettling, or trying to instigate, or make the American population discontent with their democratic process than talking about 9/11 treason. But that was not brought up in that document. So then that ties then into aspects of this article, ISIS, the mob, and Trump: More History Than We Know It, Veterans Today, that have to do with Google. And it begins to touch into the Google idea groups, and how key the Google idea groups, which was Jared Cohen, who was also in the State Department. He was actually in the Bush administration, but then I believe followed into places of influence in the Obama administration. He wrote a book with the former CEO, Eric Schmidt of Google. And this Google Ideas Group was apparently a key nexus of the relationship of information warfare to actual covert operations, especially when it came to Syria, the Syrian Human Rights Observatory, the very shady British group that helped frame a lot of these false flag or some type of fraudulent gas attacks that were blamed on the Syrian government. So this points to an aspect that needs to be dealt with in terms of Google, and so this is what you might call the liberal side of it. We've sort of just pointed out the alt-right, the Mercer aspect, the Cambridge Analytica, the way that Trump was painted as a sleeper patriot and sleeper truther to elements of the right. But then there's this aspect of Google playing in the mix here, and how Obama was actually compromised in many ways by this Google group and Jared Cohen. And Jared Cohen, I believe, was also the key player in terms of this Twitter, keeping Twitter going. Twitter was going to do a shutdown and a reworking of certain technology during the so-called Green Revolution in Iran. And Jared Cohen convinced Twitter to stay up and running because it was a key piece of information warfare that was being run in Iran. And this article asserts that Obama, the minute that he decided to play ball with these people and cover up the false flags in Syria and cover up this relationship to these false flags, that he then became a completely compromised individual, and they were able to just run over him. So that's a key piece of this. And Google, in the bigger context, we need to think about Google and Facebook as this apparent on the surface tie back into the ascent of the Israeli deep technical state. And of course, the founders of both Google and Facebook are Jewish. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are hardcore Zionists. They don't talk about Israel much, but on what's actually happening is that in terms of Google, you see that this Operation Talpiot that's run out of the IDF in Israel, and it's been running for decades, basically since the Yom Kippur War, where they find the best and brightest, technically, those with technical proclivity in Israel. They take them into the fold and train them not only in special forces, special operations, actual warfare techniques, but also in terms of very serious technical training, math and physics, software, these types of things. And apparently the part of the reason for that is to create operatives that can be then inserted in core technical functions in the internet backbone, but also in these social media organizations in the West. And Eric Schmidt, I believe, had very openly recognized that there are people from Israel, the core of Israeli technical forces, who are very key to Google's server technology. And then Facebook, of course, has been opened up a Tel Aviv office, and at least at one point, a former member of the Israeli Air Force was the head of that. But even if you think about such applications as Waze, the mapping application that started out of Israel and then gets taken up into U.S. companies. So this is a key thing to look at in terms of the massive amounts of influence and position that Israeli elements have in terms of U.S. Technical applications. So look into that. Brendan O'Connell, the Australian activist, has done substantial write-ups about this aspect of Operation Talpiot, and then the Technion, which is basically an important thing to it's a front and center. The Technion is basically the MIT of Israel, or the Caltech of Israel, but it's the center. And thinking about how that Israel is a long-term garrison state that's under perpetual warfare, basically, and where people are required to serve in the military, and that virtually the entirety of their foreign policy that then gets tied into their domestic policy is based on a long-term occupation and then warfare fighting capabilities. And of course, Mossad, known for their infamous slogan of by way of deception you might wage war. But then not only Mossad is at play here, there's also Israeli military intelligence that plays into their version of the NSA, Unit 8200. Veterans of that group are spread throughout lots of startups, including in the West, and even I've noticed that even in terms of the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, there is a startup called Scenario, Synereo, that proposes to basically be the Facebook of the blockchain. And it was one of the co-founders was a veteran of Unit 8200. And Unit 8200 is not just involved in things like you can imagine, the technical hardware the backbone of the internet or the software applications, but they actually played roles in such things as physical false flags. This has even been exposed by the Mossad whistleblower Viktor Ostrovsky, where he pointed out that the attack on Gaddafi that killed his daughter, I believe, in the 80s, based on an accusation that he'd been involved in a bombing in a Berlin discotheque that killed U.S. Marines, that the way that was what was Operation a Trojan Horse. Israeli intelligence Unit 8200, I imagine, planting a fake transmitter in Libya and transmitting out messages that could then be picked up by the NSA to blame the bombing on Gaddafi. And so that's an important thing to look at, and reporting done by veterans today has pointed out that even the Ghouta false flag of 2013 that was being used to escalate the U.S. involvement in Syria to maybe an open attack on the Syrian government that was ultimately stood down potentially by patriots within the U.S. Pentagon intelligence communities, including people like the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, apparently going and walking personally to see Obama to tell him to back off of this and not get drawn into this, or people like veterans of the CIA like Ray McGovern, whose veteran intelligence professionals for sanity wrote up an open sourcing of the fact that 90% of the U.S. intelligence community thought that there was an intelligence fraud being perpetrated on the White House around the Ghouta attacks, and that they located it in the head of the CIA, John Brennan. So the reason I bring that up is that some of the early reports, you can even find it in some of the mainstream Israeli press, I believe. There was indicators that the Turkish and the Israelis were somehow involved in the intelligence that was to have blamed the attacks on the Syrian government. And apparently even like boulders that look like boulders, but they're actually transmitting devices and listening devices of some sort had been set up inside of Syria, very likely by Israeli intelligence, very likely by this Unit 8200. So that kind of action continues, where there's this connection between physical false flags and then this much bigger scenario of running operations and being core to the technical backbone of the internet. And I would just point out that with this recent hack of the compromise of many different parts of the world, including the British health system, with these these blackmail-ware of some sort, that this has the feel of something that comes out of Israeli intelligence Stuxnet potentially. And even with the Vault 7 release that we pointed out before, that the CIA has the capacity to do cyber attacks and have it covered as some type of independent hacker or some other type of government. So the history of Stuxnet is on the rise here. We've seen very, very suspicious failures of the power grid in recent weeks, and now with
Frank Gaffney's route there.
Yes, right. And so you see actually pre-scripting on something in U.S. television going back years. Even the show Jericho that only went 2 seasons and then it was pulled, I think mid-season even. It eventually the storyline was, on the surface there was elements of the U.S. government were blaming a large-scale nuclear EMP attack that basically destroyed the country. the country's fabric, and on North Korea and Iran, I believe. But then it turned out that it was actually some type of faction within the U.S. government that had done it, and right as it was heading there, the show was pulled. So there's a lot there, and the Gaffneys, of course, continue to point in the direction of the threat of EMP attacks by North Korea, and in the background, of course, is Iran. So people need to keep their eye on that and look into the involvement of Israeli intelligence into things like Stuxnet attacks and then term backbone of the internet.
Yeah, indeed, a lot of very, very valuable information. And once again, just important to look into this, make your own conclusions out of this stuff. And but about 12 and a half minutes left here. Speaking of the Frank Gaffney, the Clash of Civilizations crowd, you mentioned earlier the Citizens United ruling and how that pretty much just gives the ability for unlimited amounts of capital and money to come flowing into the campaign coffers. And a lot of people on the right will say that this is just an example of free enterprise winning out of free enterprise, free market capitalism winning out, because now and all those talking points. But really it represents, in a lot of ways, I think it represents something much more sinister, where someone like Sheldon Adelson can literally influence, control, in many ways, at least the right side of the political spectrum. And one thing that's really interesting that I had noticed but didn't really put the pieces together on is the connection of the transition team, or the team that was when the Trump campaign was restructured around the time of the Republican convention, when Steve Bannon was brought in, represented Breitbart, which has a close working relationship with Citizens United. And then on top of that, the head of Citizens United, David Bossie, was also in a top campaign role with the restructuring of the Trump administration, with the top financier being Robert Mercer, who's been very much a funder of projects related to both Breitbart and Citizens United. Breitbart and Citizens United have a close working relationship together, where Steve Bannon has made films for Citizens United. And so this really makes an interesting tie-in when you consider this and how Adelson, how much he has benefited from this ruling. It makes a very interesting connection when you consider how closely connected the Trump transition, or the Trump team that ultimately led him to victory when the campaign was restructured in the summer of 2016, how close that is to Citizens United, and by extension to Sheldon Adelson. It really adds another layer when you think about how Breitbart has been so openly supportive of this settler policy and the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, which have been very much Adelson's goals for a long time. And it just raises more questions about exactly what this wing of the Trump movement represents, considering its closeness to both the law that pretty much gave Sheldon Adelson the ability to do whatever he wants when it comes to conservative Republican politics in the U.S., and also just this relationship in general, the closeness of it that I hadn't really put together. Seems very significant to me, and it's something else where you're not getting a lot of conversation about it.
Yes, and is it the case that Bannon actually made a film or something like that was surrounding the free speech aspects of Citizens United? Do I have that right?
It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not entirely positive. I know that the Real News documentary went into the films that Bannon made. I'm not sure exactly. I think he might have. I don't have the title of it right now, though.
Yeah, so we should look into that. And it is interesting that this Citizens United, what it really did was
Citizens United was what put out Andrew Breitbart, or Bannon's directed film starring Andrew Breitbart, which vilified the Occupy Wall Street movement, Occupy Unmasked.
Oh, right. There you go. So that there you go. That's
money
very
in politics
interesting.
Is what Occupy was against. One of the big things it was against. So it makes sense that an Adelson-connected organization like that would put out a documentary like that.
Very interesting. That's a very interesting connection, because that's actually primarily what Occupy Wall Street was about, was politics and money. Now, if there were one demand that all of Occupy agreed upon, it was that. So it's interesting to see that the attack, the sort of main documentary attack, came straight out of Bannon and Citizens United. Citizens United as a Supreme Court case basically does legalize dark money, foreign money. Read that as, global crime money. And in a certain way, we were talking about this yesterday, I believe, that the concept of the deep state actually comes out of Turkish history and Turkish academics, and then Peter Dale Scott here in the United States, a former Canadian diplomat, actually, I believe, and a professor. He began to utilize that concept to analyze the Western politics, the U.S., that type of thing. But that concept of the deep state that's now become so popular during these early days of the Trump administration describes a situation where you have a national security state that's very deeply embedded in the bureaucracy, in the actual functional organs of the government, that has a tight relationship with organized crime. But what's also implied in that is that the hierarchy there is that the state is in the control, meaning the national security apparatus, the intelligence organizations are in the commanding heights, and they have this relationship where they use or command in some way the workings and the operations of organized crime. What we're seeing now in terms of this Citizens United and the obvious mobbed upness of a Trump is in some way you might be able to see it as the moment in time where the organized crime aspect of the deep state connection actually begins to take the commanding lead. And I say that this is then backed up by what we've already spoken about how impotent the actual national security organs of the United States of America are in terms of dealing with this, and just even being able to say this Russian connection is not really about the FSB so much, or Putin. This Russian compromise, this Russian attack on American elections, this Russian backing of Trump is really a Jewish mob relationship here that's tied into what needs to be seen as a hostile foreign power, Israel, who has its hands in large portions of the American security economy and the technical umbrella of our internet. And so this needs to be looked at. And I would say one other thing is, people, on a side note, people should go look at this case. I don't know what's happened with it, but this case of a Caltech professor, a deep researcher, whistleblower, who said that she had an Israeli PhD student was trained at the Technion that I pointed out before, and was part of her team. And there were some security aspects of the research that they were doing, and this Israeli man was basically violating security protocol and was taking data out on his personal computer and was sharing documents apparently with his thesis advisor back in Israel, who apparently also was a best friend of another part of the Caltech bureaucracy, who this professor had reported this problem to, and this Caltech professor, who was best friends with this Israeli student's thesis advisor and professor back at the Technion in Israel, sat on, and finally she went to the FBI, and I don't know what's come of it, but this needs to be looked at. Because one last thing about the Technion is, you got to think about it as, imagine if the United States had the MIT, Caltech, but also the NSA and the CIA all wrapped up in a single institution that was sifting through the brightest students in the United States and training them as special forces, and then sending them out into the world as tech entrepreneurs. And that's what we have with the combination of Operation Taupiat and the Technion. And so yeah, when you have a garrison state that has the asset of a global Jewish network, a Zionim network that's made up of thousands of Jewish individuals who are willing to show loyalty to a foreign state, no matter which country they live in, then you have a highly compromised national security situation, which plays out in terms of our so-called establishment not being able to say, oh yeah, there's an Israeli elephant in the room.
Indeed. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, but now that you've mentioned the Zionim, do you want to take a minute to talk about this article in Mondoweiss, which was detailing a statement that Senator Tom Cotton, who's Bill Kristol's like literal boy in the Senate, who he gave $1 million to via his emergency committee for Israel to draft up the letter to the Ayatollah of Iran, among other things, threatening him. And Max, he made a statement about essentially what you just said about Zionim, of these operators operating throughout the world on behalf of Israel. And Max Blumenthal put out a tweet talking about the anti-Semitic canard of dual loyalty, and with all we talk about, it's becoming increasingly obvious by hearing the language of people like Blumenthal that this is the fifth wheel that we're not allowed to talk about if we want to maintain our status in some sort of club or in journalistic status or activist status. So, real quick, with about a minute and a half left, what is to you is the significance of Blumenthal coming out with a statement like this, another statement in a long line of questionable at best statements by Blumenthal?
Yes, this very much exposes the Zionist thought control that comes from the left. And someone like Max Blumenthal, we've talked about him before, he can be seen as an anti-Zionist. But when it comes down to it, he protects these key national security analyses by associating it with anti-Semitic conspiracy canards. And of course, that goes back to the Parushim, the Zionist Secret Society that Louis Brandeis was a part of, that Alison Weir has really sort of popularized, and Blumenthal attacked her for going there. And these are just anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. What I would say is that it's the Max Blumenthals of the world who don't allow us to talk about it. And let me talk about as a Jewish guy, to be able to, it doesn't allow the Jewish community to actually look at how compromised not only does the Zionim Israeli intelligence network around the world make the host countries of the Zionim assets, but also we, the Jewish people, the large majority of us who have no role in any of this type of thing, it is what helps compromise our situation in terms of being perceived as a potential security threat. So we have to doubly prove our loyalty, not because of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, but because of the material, hostile global setup of a garrison military Indeed. Jewish state.
Indeed, and that'll about wrap it up here.